Our guest this week is Bishop Michael of Woolwich. He's an Anglican and is responsible for interfaith dialogue in the British Church. Welcome to ANN Television. It's good to be back on the English Hour. Good to have you with us. Our guest today is Bishop Michael of Woolwich. And Bishop Michael was formerly Interfaith Relations Advisor to the Bishops' Council here in the UK. He's an Anglican bishop. And we will be discussing, we'll be discussing interfaith relations indeed, but Christian-Muslim relations. We'll also be discussing the whole issue of how things are going for Muslims in Britain and our own culture here, the problems we have. And equally important, well, perhaps more important than anything, we'll be discussing the issue of war and peace in the Middle East and the ethical grounds for war, if you like. If there are ethical grounds for war, a question which we will also address. So, a big agenda. Bishop Michael, thank you very much for being our guest on ANN.
It's a pleasure, thank you. Good to be with you.
Well, bless you. We'll go to a short, as is our habit here, we'll go to a short video clip and then we'll start our discussion. The pace of globalization and immigration in Britain has led to strains on society as different ways of life clash, leading to the rise of the UK Independence Party and other more extreme groups such as the English Defence League in recent times. The disillusionment many Muslims feel in Britain is also reflected in the large numbers going to join ISIS in the Middle East. Has enough been done to try and integrate different groups into British society? Large portions of the Muslim population feel discriminated against in some way, and there are Muslim communities that have become completely insular, using their own schools to educate their own young. This has made it easier for young Muslims to find truth in the brutal ideology of ISIS. The Greenwich Mosque in Woolwich, London, has been a particular hotbed for extremism, and it was at Woolwich that the terrible murder of drummer Lee Rigby of the 2nd Battalion Royal Regiment of Fusiliers by two Muslim extremists took place in broad daylight, an incident that shocked the world. Bishop Michael, thank you again. Well, it's really good to talk, and we have a big agenda.
We do.
The issue of, let's start straight in at the deep end, Islam and Christianity. It's not always been a happy relationship, and it's in some senses not a happy relationship at the moment, at least in a sense. We have a time of crisis in the Middle East, and we have our own problems here. What is your view of Islam? I mean, how? That's almost a ridiculous question, but I think Tolstoy once said the cruelest thing one man can say to another with regard to faith matters is "you are right, you are wrong, and I am right." Yeah. I mean, but we do. Can we both be right, Muslims and Christians?
I think my view of Islam, William, is very much shaped by my experience, as I guess everybody's view of Islam is. And in the first place, that's an experience not of Islam, but of Muslims and of the friends who I have known who are devout Muslims in my life. I've never lived in an Islamic country, though I've visited many times, but I have lived alongside Muslim neighbours. My sons have been educated alongside Muslim friends, and I've always been deeply impressed by the depth and integrity of their faith, or some of them certainly, and the sense they have that God is a reality in their lives. And certainly we don't believe the same things. There are many differences between Christians and Muslims, but I think we can respect that real sense of a faith alive and giving value to their life. So that's where I begin from in thinking about Muslims rather than Islam, actually.
And you are bishop of an area in which there is a considerable Muslim population, isn't there? I mean,
there is indeed. I mean, Woolwich, my patch covers southeast London, from the centre out to the edge. Woolwich itself has a large mosque, a very diverse mosque with Muslims from many parts of the world there, and a mosque that plays a really important part in the life of the town, and of course a mosque that came to prominence 2 years ago when there was a terrible murder there.
That's Greenwich Mosque, or is it,
it's sometimes called Greenwich Mosque, sometimes called Woolwich Mosque. It's actually in Woolwich, but in the borough of Greenwich, so it's the same place.
I mean, it came to prominence. You rightly point out as a centre. It's now curiously been given some award by the. It has for
just a few days ago indeed, the Chief of the Defence Staff of the British Army visited to give them an award of appreciation. I was very pleased to be there on that occasion to witness that. And actually that mosque has had close relationships with every part of the community from the earliest days when Muslims have been there. When the Muslim community first came to Woolwich, they didn't have a place to pray, and they prayed in one of the local church halls. So there's been a long texture of friendship, and I think that's the other side of the story of Christian-Muslim relations, that at local level, certainly in many parts of England, there are really close friendships and cooperation between Christians and Muslims in the community, and that story is not often told.
Right, and that is what needs to be told. But it is also a place of tension. I mean, because our listeners will be aware. I mean, killing of Lee Rigby,
indeed,
and there even Woolwich Mosque or Greenwich Mosque is has been in the past associated with extremism, and there is this kind of tension we're seeing. I suppose in Britain, I mean, I'm jumping to our second subject, but they're related in a way. We're seeing more political, not just in Britain, throughout the world, more of an extreme attitude, more polarization, and politically that's the case too.
I think in the British Muslim community, we're seeing a number of different things happening, particularly amongst young Muslims. We're seeing some, certainly, who are becoming secularized and are losing their faith and Islamic way of living. We're seeing some who are adopting a more rigorous Islam than the one that they've inherited from their parents. And we are seeing some, but I would say a small number, who are being taken in by an extremist or radicalised version of Islam. And I think in many ways that's not so much about, in the first place, about the theology. It's about a quest for an identity. There are a lot of young Muslims in Britain who are very unsure of who they are. They're caught between their parents' generation and Western society, and I think the temptation simply to adopt an identity that's on offer, however extreme it is quite strong. So we need to provide a better alternative, and that's a task for all of us, not just for the Muslim community. I mean, it's interesting that the two young men who were convicted of the murder of that soldier in Woolwich had been brought up as Christians, in fact. So
really,
yeah. So this is not just a Muslim issue; it's an issue for all of us, I would say.
Interesting. So they were both converts to Islam.
They were. I mean, converts to a form of Islam, certainly, in quite a confused kind of way, I would say. And so I think I am not happy when people say this is an issue which the Muslim community has got to sort out. I think it's a problem which we all face together, and we're all in this together. And one of the things that I think was really important in Woolwich after that terrible event was the way in which the communities came together and supported one another and recognised we're all affected by this, whether we're Muslims, Christians, people of other faiths or of no faiths, and we've got to work at it together. And
to what degree? I mean, Britain is very different internationally in its approach to other countries in Europe. We've taken maybe, I mean, I don't know whether this is, I'm jumping around here in the discussion, but I mean, for instance, we've taken 90 Syrian refugees. Germany has taken hundreds of thousands.
Indeed.
I mean,
Yeah.
and there's an interesting argument there too. Of course, is it right or is it wrong to take all these refugees? I remember going to Al-Azhar, and they had an opinion that it was actually wrong to take these refugees because we were stripping the Middle East of their minorities.
I see that argument, and clearly the mid-term goal has got to be to make the Middle East secure for people of all faiths, and particularly for minority communities there. But I think in the short term there's a pressing humanitarian crisis, and I personally would hope that our country could step up to the mark a little bit more and be more generous in who we accept. But I do understand the argument that this is effectively depleting an already vulnerable and endangered Christian presence in the Middle East.
Yes, that we are kind of part of the ethnic cleansing process when we take. I mean,
well, inadvertently, but yeah.
But getting back to Islam and Christianity, I mean, and indeed all religions. I mean, we should place an equal value on each other's religion. Is religion the problem, or is it the answer? I mean, we look at the world today, and we're tearing ourselves apart, and much of it is based on religious ideologies or conflicting religious ideologies. I mean, is religion still a force for good in today's world?
I think the way I see it is that religion is a very powerful force, one way or another. It touches the deepest level of men and women's hearts, their thoughts, their emotions, and it can be used for really wonderful results, and it can also be distorted to create division and hatred. And it's up to us, and particularly to us who are religious leaders, I think, to use it in a responsible and a generous way. Now, that's not to say that we all believe the same. I think one of the attitudes that has made interfaith dialogue difficult in the past has been always to look for agreement. And sometimes the most useful thing we can do is to identify our disagreements.
You're so right.
And work with those, creatively and honestly. And that creates a much better atmosphere. And, if you're my friend, I can disagree with you.
Yes.
I don't have to hate you because we disagree. I think that's a really important principle.
It is, isn't it? Yes.
And I guess in Britain, my sense is that we're now moving to the point where dialogue has got to that level of maturity where we can disagree in a good way and still respect one another. And we've moved beyond the kind of politeness of, we all agree on the same thing, but we know we don't really. I think we've got beyond that. I really hope so.
Christians should never reject the other. We should live and let live. Absolutely. That's the rule. And presumably it's the rule for Muslims too. I mean, live and let live. And yet we don't. We have few great world religious leaders that really speak out for peace. I mean, if I have to think of one that over the years has hit me as really being a great peacemaker, I'd say perhaps the Dalai Lama.
Yep.
But it is hard to find a great visionary Muslim or Christian voice. I know people say nice things about the Pope, but I don't. And
rightly so.
but we don't get the sort of big figures that we are looking for, and I wonder. I mean, in this time of crisis, I'm not sure the religious leaders are really speaking out as they desperately need to. We all need leadership. It's a very broken time.
Yeah, I mean, and religious leaders are frail human beings as well.
Yes.
And all of us, I think, are trying to do lots of different things as religious leaders. We're caring for our own people, but we need, I think, in the 21st century, to build into the core business of religious leadership, alongside the primary concern for our own people, a real concern for the other. I think that that's part of what being a Christian leader is, and I think you're right. I think that's true of other religions too. I wear around my neck this pectoral cross, which belonged to Bishop Hassan Dikhani Tafti, the Anglican bishop in Iran.
Oh, right.
It was given to me. No, his son was murdered.
His son was murdered.
There was an assassination attempt on Bishop Hassan.
I see.
But it was his son who was brutally murdered. And Hassan was bishop of that very small Christian community at a very difficult time. But combined with his pastor's care of them, a real commitment to Christian-Muslim friendship and dialogue. And that's a huge inspiration for me every time I put this cross around my neck, to think that in the most difficult of circumstances, a religious leader could do that, actually, to have that real concern for the other too.
Yes.
So this is not just an abstract idea. I've seen it lived out, and that's hugely encouraging. Right?
Interesting. And you believe very much in the kind of a forgiveness approach to the other. I mean, we need to, presumably we need to expand that and get away from this hatred, that is so prevalent now. Do you see? I mean, is there a reason for this trend towards more extremism in the world? Certainly more religious extremism.
I'm sure there is. I'm sure there are probably lots of factors, but I think one factor is, at a time of instability, probably at a time of globalisation, when people feel that their identities are being brought together in a way that they may find a bit oppressive, I think there's a natural tendency to emphasise what separates you from each other, to give you your identity. I think when people's identities feel threatened, that's when they will turn to an extremist answer, because it gives you a simple way out.
That's very interesting, actually.
That's my sense.
I can see that. That's very almost quite a profound comment, and I can actually, that resonates. But coming back to Britain, we've had, a kind of multicultural approach here, as opposed to the French. I mean, this is a subject we've discussed before on ANN, but I think it's an important one, as opposed to the French integrationist approach, or the American integrationist approach. I mean, America goes to, historically has gone to extremes with busing of school children to force integration of children from different heritages and communities. We've gone exactly the reverse, particularly under not the current government, but a couple of governments back with Mr. Blair. We introduced faith schools for all religions. Some would argue ghettoizing some of the young. I mean, do you, because once you have a faith school that is only, or tends to be only for one religion, although it shouldn't be, then it means that society's become more divided. Have we made a mistake in Britain?
I think I understand the policy of multiculturalism, and I think it was done for the best of motives, actually, to affirm people and give them a safe space to find themselves, really find new communities, to find their identity, feel confident living in Britain. I think it became a bit of a fossilising approach that put people in separate silos so they couldn't interact. I don't actually think it's right to blame faith schools for that, because in many ways British schools reflect the communities that they serve, and a lot of state schools are as heavily dominated by members of one community as a faith school is. My wife taught for years in a state primary school, not a faith school, in Leicester, which was 97% Muslim, simply because the neighbourhood was 97% Muslim.
Yes.
So I think there's an underlying issue about housing, demography, and our ways of living together as cities that you can't just blame on education, actually.
But nonetheless, we have this slightly divided country, and where do we? There's no having adopted these multicultural policies, it's very hard to row back from them, isn't it? You can't to an integrationist approach.
Well, I don't hear many people nowadays talking about multiculturalism in a particularly positive light. So I think we are looking for another model that doesn't negate what multiculturalism was trying to do, but moves us beyond it to a sort of intercultural model, really, where people in their own communities have the confidence to engage with others. And from a Church of England's point of view, it's really important for us that we have a presence in every community in England, that we don't withdraw from some communities and say, oh, that's just an Islamic community, there's no role for us there. And indeed that many of our Church of England schools, in terms of their intake, have very, very large numbers of Muslim and other faith students there. So our schools are Christian in their ethos, and we see that as a way of serving the community, but they're not exclusively Christian in the pupils who study there. And that's important for us because I think we do have a role to bring communities together and to make sure we don't become ghettoised.
But you don't believe, the French have a model of education whereby education is quite secular and religion is kept out of education entirely. You wouldn't think that was a better way forward for Britain?
Well, I think it's a French way forward, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's a better way forward. I think our histories are just so different, and laïcité has never been an English or a British way of approaching either education or life together. And I look at France, and it's not without its problems in terms of how its communities relate to one another. So I don't think any European country has found the right solution. And it's a challenge. I think we're all trying to create together a society in which people can live by their faith, respect one another, and still feel part of a bigger whole.
And this seeking for, I guess, a rejection of materialism that drives some quite well-educated young Muslims from Britain to go and fight in the Middle East. It's a Puritanism. It's also a feeling of disaffection as far as their own society, our society is concerned. How do we resolve that? How do we make things better?
I think we need to have a more compelling vision of what a good society looks like and what a fulfilling life looks like. And that seems to me the only answer on offer from many quarters at the moment is just more consumption, a greater GDP, and go for more economic growth. And that's not actually going to answer people's deep spiritual needs. So I think we need a much richer account of what human flourishing means. And that comes, for me, from a vision of a generous God who wants all his people to flourish. And I think that kind of tradition is in the best of Islam as well, and indeed in other faiths too. Sure. So we need to kind of work at creating that vision of the common good.
I'm sure that's
now, that's
true.
a very long-term solution, and there are probably more proximate goals of protecting people from radicalising propaganda. I think that's a real issue, but in the long term, that can't be the only answer.
And there is something. I notice, perhaps I'm wrong. Well, I notice with our own children, up to a point. There is a greater hedonism. It's very unfair on my children; they're not bad, but there, amongst some of the younger generation, there's much greater hedonism. There's much greater materialism than there was 40 years ago, and that's partly because of the insecurities of our society. People's jobs, you have 0-hour contracts. You have, people find it very hard to come out of university and get jobs. And it means that they have to look at their income and how to get the next dollar in a way that perhaps when we were young we didn't have to. And maybe that applies worldwide.
I think that's right. I think people don't have the secure sense of investment in society that probably we had in our generation. We're roughly the same generation. And that's I think when you feel that that's threatened, of course you look after yourself in the first place, and I understand that. So we need to build the communities where people can feel at home and secure.
So coming to the final issue, the big issue, I guess, in a way, or at least it is, it's what's war and peace. I mean, well, let's start from the beginning. Are you what we call a pacifist, or do you believe there are circumstances in which war is justifiable?
I'm not a pacifist. I respect the pacifist tradition in Christianity, and I think it's really important for the whole church, the whole Christian community, that there are pacifists, because I think they keep us from a too easy acquiescence in the spirit of the age. But I do believe that war is justifiable in sometimes, and I like that language. Rather than a just war, I think I would talk about a justifiable war, because I think a just war sounds a little bit like we know what justice is and we will enforce it in a war. I think sometimes in very limited circumstances, which the Christian tradition has spent a lot of time thinking and praying about, war may be the least of the evils that face us, and in that sense it can be justifiable, but that justifiability is set around with a lot of limitations.
Yeah, interestingly, I mean, are we in accord? My understanding of, I'm no scholar at all, but my understanding of the Muslim approach to war is, or what I believe the Prophet Muhammad teaches, is that you should not attack the other unless the other attacks you, and that as a general rule, war should only be in self-defense. And in the circumstances in which you do go to war in self-defense, then collateral damage, the killing of civilians, is always forbidden. Now, that's my understanding of the Islamic view of war. Would the Christian view of war be similar?
Yeah, I think Christian and Muslim Islamic theories of what constitutes a justifiable war have a lot of parallels, and there are two particular issues. One is the cause of the war. You have to have a just cause, which, as you say, is generally self-defence. And then the issue of the conduct of the war, that it has to be conducted in a proportionate and limited way. And I would add also the third, which is in both Christianity and Islam, that war has to be conducted by somebody who's authorised to do that. So you can't just have anybody popping up and saying, I'm the caliph of whatever and I'm calling a war, or I'm the leader of a crusade and I'm calling a war. You need to have duly constituted authority. So it seems to me there are three tests: the justice of the cause, the authority of the person who declares the war, and the way in which the war is conducted. And I see a lot of parallels in the way that Christians and Muslims have tried to delimit all three of those.
Now, given that circumstance, there has been a lot of the Iraq War, the liberation of Iraq, even currently in Iraq, the fight against ISIS, the war in Libya, the great wars in the Middle East that have been conducted by the West. Don't get me wrong, I'm all for saying goodbye to Saddam Hussein. I think he was a real problem, but and a problem for his people. But having said that, the way we conducted the war, the collateral damage has been massive.
Absolutely.
And the killing of that has to be, presumably that has to be wrong. I mean, we are wrong in doing that.
Well, that's my view. I mean, I think you have to look at each case in turn. It seems to me, and it seemed to most of us in the Church of England at the time, that the war on Saddam Hussein did not fit the criteria of a just war. And I think I think the verdict of history would probably support that. It seems to me also that something needs to be done at the moment to contain Islamic State or to take Islamic State out, and probably military action in the short term is the only thing that will do that. But we've got to keep our sense of the limitations of that. We've got to look to the long-term consequences of that, and we've got to not be gung-ho about it, and we've got to put a better vision alongside it. So I think there is a case for military containment or of Islamic State at the moment, but you know, it's a tough call.
But now you've just said something very interesting, and perhaps we need to understand it. You've said that, in your personal view, the war against Saddam Hussein arguably was not a justifiable war, and yet you said that, in your personal view, the war against the group that in the Middle East is called Daesh, what we call ISIS, is a justifiable war. I mean, why the distinction?
Well, I think you look at the particularly the issue of the cause. I mean, it seems to me the damage that Islamic State, ISIS, is causing in terms of human lives and suffering and the disruption of societies is immense and needs to be stopped. And I can't see a way of stopping that other than in the short term by military action. Whether you call that a war or not, I don't know. We don't want to get into hair splitting about what's a war and what's not a war, but it seems to me military action is the cause there. I don't see a similar justification for the war against Saddam Hussein.
Even though, I mean, we talk about Halabja, I mean, 5,000 dead, and when the large numbers that were killed in southern Iraq, I mean, I don't know we'll ever know how many by Saddam Hussein. And not just Halabja, the Anfal campaign throughout. I mean, nonetheless, you feel that because he wasn't directly threatening us, he's not.
Well, I think the situation when we went to war was very different. I mean, Halabja was not the reason given for the war.
No,
it was the elusive weapons of mass destruction, which never were found and presumably didn't exist. So the cause seems to me quite different in that case.
Well, that's fair enough. What about? I mean, it's unfair to ask you to go through conflict after conflict.
Thank you. I'm very glad I'm not a military commander.
Yeah.
I'm sure everybody else is too.
But brutally and unfairly, just one more. Libya. I mean, we took action in Libya, which was largely at third hand. I mean, and Libya is a terrible mess now.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, we intervened to overthrow Gaddafi, arguably, well, I wouldn't say as brutal as Saddam, but it runs him a close second. And we intervened to overthrow that man. Well, I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I'm not going to judge either of these men. They're figures in history. But the point is that we decided that they had to be got rid of. Libya has been a catastrophe. Was that a just war on our part? Or justifiable?
I don't know. I mean, I think sometimes you make the call at the time and only history shows if you're right or not. I don't know the answer to that, but what I do feel strongly about is that having been involved militarily, we do need to take some responsibility for the consequences. I think we can't walk away from that. And as you say, the consequences are terrible, really.
So presumably, I mean, this war at third hand, we get now, both by, not just by our own forces, by the Israelis, by the Americans, a lot of use of drones. It may become a big feature of modern warfare. Is that justifiable, the use of, you're targeting people? Presumably, your intention is to take out people who are your enemy, but you're doing so very remotely. I mean,
I think there's a real question about the confidence one can have in intelligence in that case, because it seems to me that the aim of that kind of very technological warfare is to be as clean and clinical and to limit civilian casualties as much as you can. But if you're going to do that, you really need to have intelligence that is commensurate with your technology, and I'm not convinced at the moment that we have that, because the very remoteness of the military technology actually, I think, limits the on-the-ground intelligence that we have. So I'm not convinced.
Because we have so many, I mean, it is just extraordinary now seeing the Middle East today, and it's split apart. I mean, this fault line between Shiite Islam and Sunni Islam that runs across Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, down through Bahrain, and now swings up through Yemen. Even though a Yemeni, I mean, most Yemenis a few years ago wouldn't have known that they were Shiite. It was only because we tell them they're Shiites.
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely.
And they're not even sure about it now. But this extraordinary development and war in Libya, and we have a kind of the great powers are all fomenting this thing. Russia's on one side, Britain's on another with America. Europe doesn't know where it is, and we're all, and the other great powers are all involved: Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and Iran. Heaven forbid, the next thing we know, China will start intervening, and there'll be so many of us meddling in this pie. In a sense, it'd be better if we all went home, wouldn't it? I mean,
well, I have some sympathy with that view, but I think for us as a church, the other huge concern we have is the fate of the Christian presence in the Middle East. And when the kind of fault lines between Sunni and Shia, or other fault lines within the Islamic community, or any other fault lines in society open up, it is always the smallest, most vulnerable groups, including the Christian presence, which is now small, but it didn't used to be, that are most at risk. So I think our real concern for all the churches is how we safeguard and sustain a Christian presence in the Middle East, and that's a massive issue for us, and things don't look good at the moment.
We could do a lot more, of course, I would imagine. The help for refugees in the region is very limited, despite the crocodile tears we've wept. A lot of these minorities have terrible times in camps in Turkey, and
absolutely.
Yes, it's a bad situation, and I don't know that we pay enough attention to the plight of our fellow Christians, let alone the other minorities, the Yazidis and so on.
I think there's been I've noticed a real step change in the last year, really, in the last 6 months probably, in this country, in the churches, in awareness of the plight of Christians in the Middle East. I think a year ago many English Christians were not aware that there were Christian communities in the Middle East. I think we now are very much conscious of that. They're very much in our prayers, and we are looking for practical ways to support them.
Well, I hope we can find them, and ideally practical ways that are really tangible and that are not necessarily military. Although, yes, I'm with you, I guess. We do have to counter Daesh, ISIS, but
a military action is not sufficient.
No,
clear about
absolutely, that. And there are reasons that group. There is a sense of a chip on your shoulder that is, regionally, in terms of the Sunni community in Iraq. That has developed and that has to be addressed. I mean, everybody has a grievance.
Yes, memories are long. And I think that's something we forget in the West sometimes as well,
yes.
Where we live, as you say, in a quite short-term hedonistic society. Memories fade, and the memories of those in conflict zones and the memories of the poor tend to be much longer.
So what's the message for us as Christians? I mean, we are supposed to love one another and forgive. We're not that ready to forgive our enemies, but we are actually supposed to forgive our enemies, aren't we? And
we are. I mean, I think the message for us in the West, in a safe place, is to support our fellow Christians, to be aware of the struggle that they face, and to do what we can here to build good and positive relations between Christians and Muslims and Jews and others, which hopefully can be of some help in more difficult parts of the world.
Well, let's hope we can. Bless you, Bishop. Thank you very much for being our guest on ANN.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
Sharing your thoughts with us.
Thank you very much.
We haven't quite finished the interview. There is another little moment, so bear with us and we'll come back. So, Bishop Michael, you brought us a book, and it's tell us, Strangers to the City.
Strangers to the City, Reflections on the Beliefs and Values of the Rule of St. Benedict, the founder of the monastic movement in the West, really. I'm not a monk. I'm married with 3 children, but I've always been struck by the way in which Benedict, at a time when society was changing very rapidly, falling apart around him, Benedict found a way of gathering a community who were faithful to what they saw to be the call of God. And that community, starting in quite a small way, actually became the bedrock of later Western European history. It was the monks who formed Western Europe. They built great monasteries, they preserved learning, they developed agriculture, and it all came from wanting to be faithful in a time of change and gathering people who shared that vision in a small way. And I find that a hugely hopeful sign, because I think society is changing very fast around us now, and I think we need to do the same thing, really. Gather people together who share a vision of what God wants for our society and of the common good, and build on that, and actually that can transform our societies in ways that we cannot begin to imagine now.
So creating a cell of good living and then moving out from there.
A cell of good living is a very good expression. That's exactly what I think we're called to do.
Interesting. And Benedict did this. His order was based on that kind of...
It was, and he didn't set out to transform Western European civilization. He set out to be faithful to the vision that he had, and others gathered around him because it was a compelling vision. And look what happened. And I think that's, I think growth and transformation often begins in the most unexpected and hidden places. We don't know what the future will be, but I have hope that through being faithful, we can transform our society.
And then that cell of good living writ large, you believe in one brotherhood and sisterhood of mankind that
absolutely
that is all for one and one for all.
Absolutely, and that's built on respect for each other. Even when we're being difficult with one another, monasteries are not always easy places to live. I believe, but Benedict talks about actually putting up with each other and expecting the best of each other and cutting each other some slack. And I think there's a lot of very humane wisdom in that.
Bless you. So this is written by this particular book.
This is written by a monk of Tarawara in Australia.
Oh gosh,
or however you pronounce that.
Yes.
But I found as a non-monk, in those terms as a layman, that actually some of that common sense vision of holiness makes a lot of sense in my life too.
Interesting. So Strangers to the City. The author's name is?
Michael Casey.
Michael Casey, published by,
Published by Paraclete Press.
Excellent. Well, very good. Strangers to the City by Michael Casey. Thank you for bringing that to our attention, and bless your heart again. Thank you for being our guest.
It's a pleasure. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.